We're on page 254 of Thoreau's life. He's telling us he's weaving a delicate texture. Here he says he's a kind of basket of a delicate texture. A basket of delicate texture weaving Thoreau's week. Through these years, as Thoreau grew from Emerson's apprentice to his assistant, friend, and rival, his most treasured project, a week on the Concord and Merrimack rivers, was always at his elbow. Growing, that's a book he wrote. Growing slowly and steadily, years later, he would tell readers of Walden that he had once created, quote, a kind of basket of a delicate texture, unquote, a fitting image for his first book, into the narrative of his 1839 river trip with John. Henry had woven everything he ever felt, thought, and experienced. Concord fishes, the feel of dew in the river dawn, the look of a cooked passenger pigeon, non-payment of taxes, Indian names, the philosophy of friendship, Hindu scripture, bad dreams, old poems, mountain walks. Should we read that book? Everything that's in it is in it. From all points of the compass, from the earth beneath and the heavens above, have come these inspirations. Each, quote, that's what he said. Each inspiration duly entered in his journal to be winnowed, quote, winnowed into lectures and then into essays that would stand at last, quote, like statues on their pedestals, unquote, lovely to look at, quote, but, quote, the statues rarely took hold of hands, unquote. A week would, he hoped, be better than this, not a stiff or formal gallery of statues, but an organic and flowing whole, its multitudinous parts held together and watered into life by the river. And maybe it's more of an adventure, a canoe trip. You've never been on a canoe trip? The Boundary Waters up in Minnesota. John and Henry's river trip during that blessed charge, summer of 1839, had been planned as a boyish adventure, not of a literary excursion, but from the start. The fledgling writer couldn't help but see its literary and symbolic overtones. Through what they might mean didn't become clear until after John's death in January of 1842. By the following fall, Henry had begun to reimagine the river voyage as an elegy for his lost brother into the pages of his big new notebook, the, quote, long book. He sowed passages at intervals like seeds in furrows, giving each one room to germinate and grow. Around the time his Walden plans were solidifying, he began to organize the notebook's entries, imagining a book like nothing Emerson had ever written. Not a series of self-contained essays, each one a beautiful statue on a pedestal divorced from context, but a living book. A travel narrative. It's a travel book, enriched with reflection and literature and history. Margaret Fuller had shown him how to do it. When she had visited him on Staten Island in the fall of 1843, she was bubbling over with memories of her summer trip to the Great Lakes and plans for turning that trip into her first book, a travel narrative that would be a kind of letterbox for the thoughts, observations, poems, and commentaries, extracts inspired by all she experienced along the way. Quote, Summer on the Lakes in 1843 was published just a year later in the summer of 1844, and as Thoreau read it, he saw how to pull together his own book. So you just read somebody else's book, and then you write your own. He would fold these 2 weeks' journey into one. To a 7 days creation story from Saturday launch to Friday return, a journey of discovery climaxing in their climb to the summit of Mount Washington. You ever been to the top of Mount Washington? Do you know you can drive up to it now and take a train? Or take a train. or walk up. It's like the end of the Appalachian Trail or something. Thoreau tested out the concept at the Concord Lyceum in March 1845, just before he built his Walden house. And on his first day at Walden, he had begun the first draft. A year later, he read some of it aloud to Emerson, sitting under an oak tree on the riverbank. An invigorated Emerson blessed it, quote, pastoral as Isaac, Walton, spicy as foie gras, broad and deep as menu, unquote. Thoreau knew he was on his way. We're reading about chapter 6 of Thoreau as a writer's life. A year after that, March 1847, he read it aloud to an ecstatic Alcott, who called it, quote, picturesque and flowing as the streams he sails on, with, quote, a toughness too and a sinewy vigor as of roots, and, quote, wild meats, and, quote, the moist lustres of the fishes in the bed below, unquote. This was American literature at last, with the quotes, the sod and sap and fiber and flavor of New England, unquote. Emerson was still excited about it, too, in a letter to Everett Duyckinck, the editor of Wiley and Putnam Literary World. He declared this book of extraordinary merit, would attract lovers of nature, scholars of literature, thoughtful readers of all kinds, for its originality and profoundness. He hoped Wiley and Putnam would publish it in their Library of American Books series alongside, here's the big names here, Hawthorne, Poe, Melville. Even though Emerson's critical eye already spotted trouble ahead, the narrative of the little voyage, quote, is a very slender thread for such big beads or ingots as are strung on it. Remember we talked about half of American literature came from the town of one town, Concord, half of so if you want to be an American writer, you don't have much choice but to go to Concord. If you want to be like Hawthorne, Poe, or Melville, or Emerson, or Thoreau, or Alcott, or they just, it's the only place you can write. Just kidding. Duyckinck might have been skeptical after all. Hawthorne had warned him there was but, quote, one chance in 1,000, unquote, Thoreau would produce a good book. But Emerson convinced him something promising was afoot, so he announced Thoreau's forthcoming book in the literary world. But Emerson had jumped the gun. Thoreau wasn't quite ready. A month, then 2 went by while he polished the manuscript. By the time he finally set out for Duyckinck at the end of May, it was too late. Duyckinck liked it, but he'd just been fired. After 2 anxious months, it became clear that Wiley and Putnam had said no. See what happens if you hesitate. He was slow at the switch.
Slow at what? Sorry, I didn't listen to that. My mind went away.
The publisher guy was fired from Wiley, so he couldn't publish. Emerson tried again, sending another enthusiastic letter to the Philadelphia publisher W.H. Furness. But his firm was too overwhelmed with submissions to bother with an unknown writer. William Anderson sent feelers to the Harpers in New York City, but they too said no. All through September, Thoreau persisted, even after Thoreau set off to England, but by November he'd given up. 4 different publishers, he wrote Emerson, had turned it down. But Wiley and Putnam had agreed to publish it if Thoreau would pay the cost. Quote, if I like the book well enough, I should not delay, but for the present I am indifferent. I believe this is, after all, the course you advised to let it lie. Emerson advised no such course. Don't delay even a month, he fired back from England. quote, I shall print it at once, nor do I think that you would incur any risk in doing so that you cannot well afford. It is very certain to have readers and debtors here as well as there. Henry delayed a month and then another. An impatient Emerson wrote to Lydian, quote, if Henry Thoreau means one day to come to England, let him not delay another day to print his book. Or if he do not, let him print it. But how could he? ? Emerson's reassurances that Thoreau could, quote, well afford, unquote, to incur the, quote, risk would hardly pay the printer. That didn't pay for the printer. You need money. 4 years before, Emerson's financial backing had gotten Ellery Channing's first book into print, but to Thoreau, Emerson had no such offer, boxed in, unable to afford printing cost. Thoreau concluded that his book would not be published until it was simply too good to turn down. So he took it off the market and set himself to making it even better. In the meantime, to raise money, he published a Katahdin and sent it off to Greeley. Hence his fervent gratitude when in mere months Greeley had not only placed Katahdin but paid handsomely and begged for more.
What is that?
That's a Katahdin. It's a mountain he climbed.
He wrote about it.
Yeah.
It was a book or a essay.
It's, I think, maybe an article or something. But anyways, he's like a hiker.
Mm-hmm.
He's a travel writer. He's a nature hiker. Well, what Greeley begged for was more short pieces. What Thoreau had was a book. Quote, my book is swelling again under my hands, he replied. Quote, but as soon as I have leisure, I shall see to those shorter articles, so look out. Nothing Greeley said could persuade him from making a week his highest priority. Thoreau was certain only a big new book would get him out from under Emerson's shadow, and besides, before anything else, must come his memorial to John. Remember, he took a canoe trip with John, his brother, up to Maine, that is. Wait, no, the Concord and Merrimack, not Maine, but up the river. Do you think we should canoe up the Concord River?
No.
Anyways, we finished on page 257, reading about this interesting book, the book, what happened to A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers, about the writer's life of Thoreau. It's about getting your book published. How to get published. Just get a lot of money.